join really at the end of World War II. They see that as there. And I hope people can pause and think of the implications of that. Where 6% of the world population said that we must command 25% or more of the world economy. And as a matter of policy, we will not tolerate or we don't want to accept anyone being a near peer rival. So nobody being even like one lap behind us. They have to be 4 laps behind. And that's one of the reasons why I think what we are seeing now may very well not simply end with a Trump presidency. The form might change. Some people might be more polite and nice about it. I mean, if you're doing political science, the term they use is a hegemonic power. You know, you want to be a hegemon. You need to be the big boss that nobody takes up questioning. So if you look at the rise of China, China's share of the global economy is now roughly in line with China's share of the world's population. You know, the United States is about, at the highest estimate, 300 million people. China, 1.5 billion people. So, I mean, so if things were to work out in some kind of equity, you would think the Chinese economy should be 5 times the size of the United States. They have 5 times the people. It's a massive country. So it says economic weight shifts for, and then the geopolitics follow. So I want to argue that the geopolitics we are seeing now is the United States' response to the shift in economic weight, where they are now concerned that for the first time in modern history, they have something approaching what they call a near peer. You know, the Chinese economy is growing in size. You know, if you go to China, China is one of the few countries in the world that have what you might call technological sovereignty. They don't use YouTube. If you go to China, I mean, we use WhatsApp. If you go to China, you don't see that, but there's like WeChat, which is a super app where you can live your whole life. It's not just messaging, you make all your payments. So now there's a technological rival. And the Australian National Institute of Research put out a very interesting, they put this out every year. And they look at the 25 emerging technologies, the new technologies. And China is ahead in 23 of them, of the 25. So the geopolitical shifts that we see now, I want to suggest to you that you want to understand them through the lens that for the very first time since the 1940s, the United States faces what looks like a near peer, someone that can rival them economically as well as technologically, not yet military. So in some ways, what does that mean for us in the immediate? And what is so stark about the Trump administration and the way they have chosen to respond to this crisis? I would argue that all of the cushion that we had as small island states are really being quietly removed. And if you don't want to believe me, yesterday, I think President Trump in a speech spoke about Venezuela becoming the 51st state. So just your very ability to be an independent country is being questioned. So every plank of our post-independence development model is being quietly removed. Even our own capacity to be independent. And well, some of us in here are old enough to remember the first Cold War, the old Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. And it was global competition, but then you were like two lovers trying to suit you and offer you different things to go with them versus the other. In their response to the shifting economy, the United States now it's almost a punishment. You do what I ask, or I am going to punish you. So you can have a 10-year US visa, but if you land in the US with an Antiguan visa, they're giving you like 27 days. Okay, so it's that punishment. So I want to highlight maybe free and immediate. So the migration safety valve has been a very important aspect of the curriculum. You know, that capacity to leave, go to the US, the UK, Canada. And it maybe you should think that what is happening in the US is the most dark case, but Europe, Canada are also in the same mindset. In a sense, they have been partners in crime in the United States, right, so to speak. I mean, their economies are tacked on to the US, but they are also concerned about this shift. So that migration safety valve is tightening, means less remittances, fewer exit options. We're in Dominica, where climate issues, natural disasters are a big issue. Climate finance has totally gone on. You know, in fact, climate change has been dismissed. But again, the point is the Trump administration is the blunt end of it. If the world cannot go solar without China. China has the largest solar manufacturing capacity in the world. But the Biden administration deliberately did not cooperate with that because China is so far ahead that they do not want China to have that market. Electric cars, China is so far ahead in the world in electric cars, and you cannot buy an electric car from China in the United States. So for the United States has been an economist by training, free trade has been a US, but you cannot buy a BYD or anything in the United States. They're simply banned. So climate finance and Dominica's lived through this preferential trade, bananas and from St. Vincent, and now CBI is on the track. And in many ways, so that's sort of the theme of my lecture, or the theme that no one is coming to save us. In that the United States, the Europeans, Canada, our traditional partners, places of exit, they are in a fight of their own. You put an invasion term, everybody's breaking for themselves. And so no one is coming to save it. Because that, for me, that was very striking that in everything that President Trump has done that has in some ways worried us in the Caribbean, the Canadians and the Europeans have not really protested, they've not really said anything. In fact, the Canadians and the Europeans only got real. When did they get upset with the president? When did they make a stand? Canada, but even Paris was when the Paris were introduced, they did not end up and say, okay, this thing has to come through the WTO. All of them went and tried to make their own individual deal they held with the rest of the world. The only point where they really took, well, maybe 2 points. The main point where it was Greenland, which is part of the European Union. So I would want to, because I think for us, for a lot of reasons in the region, we've always had a bit of an external orientation. You know, you could migrate, you get some money from your family overseas, the EU is going to help us, and so on. I think for the first time we are really independent. We are on our own. No one is coming to save us, and we have to do it ourselves. If we look at the Dominica context, I think I want to share maybe 6 numbers that will be staple of the what I will share. In debt, public debt to GDP, that's something economists live around 103%. So the amount the country owes is bigger than the size of the economy. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank benchmark that it should be a maximum of 60%. So quite a lot. But in many ways, what I take from that is there is so much the government can do to save us going forward. And as a population, civil society is the one we also have to try to save ourselves. So what can we do? Again, high vulnerability to natural disasters. But there's something about Dominica's location that the hurricanes just, if you go back to history, you see that. Yeah. I know as economists, everybody went with like one storm, 226% of GDP disappeared. The value of the damage from Hurricane Maria was more than twice the size. Current account deficit, 38%. What it means is that the economy in Dominica is still organized to import goods from the United States in particular. That's the way the economy is structured, still a high level of import dependence. And again, you see how we get caught up in these global things. So when the United States, Trump very early was speaking about imposing a fine or a fee on Chinese shipping. Again, how does that come home to us? And it shows how the world has shifted. If I want to ask you, so he was proposing a special fee on goods that came in Chinese made. What percentage of the world do you think are made in China? You know, something like 80+% of the world is made in China. So, okay, there's a high dependence on the CBI. Yeah, and that accounts for well over the money from CBI account for well over a third of the economy. And that's a classic example of external dependence, because it says that's in some ways is hostage to the part. Because persons really want the passport to get to the US and Europe. That's a big part. As lovely as Dominica, many people want to live. However, we see a lot of potential with geothermal. I think that has the significant potential to be a game changer. And at full potential can account for maybe 70% of Dominica's energy needs. That has a significant game changer. And well, Dominica's population is one of these interesting statistics. If you Google it, you get 70,000. Dominicans tell me somewhere between 50 and 60. Yes, you have a. I guess I tend to be an optimist, like nature. But the good thing about being small is that if you decide to do something, you can do it for the entire country. You can shift an entire country if you are determined. So it's small enough to actually pivot. So what this slide is trying to really make a point is that for Dominica's history as an independent country, the country has actually done relatively well economically in terms of the growth of the economy, growth of income, and so on. However, what happens is Dominica keeps substituting one external pillar for another. So coming out in 77, what was the external pillar that drove the economy? It was bananas. Again, external action really collapsed that banana. So between 1978 and 1995, Dominica had preferential access to the market. And there was something like 24,000 registered banana farmers at the peak of this. Big chunk of the economy. WTO ruling ends the preference, and data suggests that you're down to about 5,000. So in the gap, then CBI steps into the gap. So we sort of argue that the economy has that vulnerability in that you move from one external pillar to another, and that remains there. What replaces CBI? If or when that preference ends, I think, is the policy question that should keep everyone up. Is to replace the point, Dominica replaced the bananas with the passport. And I'm suggesting that the next economy must replace the passport with really building out your own productive capacity that is less dependent on external. I mean, CBI is always controversial. I don't necessarily have I'm a huge fan of it, but I'm not complaining either. You have to sell something, you have to tax something. And the CBI is a tax on foreigners, doing something. And it has done a lot. Yeah, I mean, the CBI inflows. I don't know enough to say whether they've been optimally used, but certainly that there have been some benefits. But again, the question is, I argue it bought time, but I'm of view it cannot be the strategy for Dominica going forward. And the real challenge now is to use the remaining window that CBI has to build the post-CBI economy. And again, just to highlight again, but I'm not going to depress anybody, but the high vulnerability of Dominica to natural disasters. So this is a huge challenge, which in some ways explains partly where you are in terms of that debt to GDP and so on. It's not exclusively a bad management. And the economy barely clears one recovery before the next one. So what do I say? I want to have maybe a little conversation about what's the way forward. What I've been arguing in my series of writing is that no one is coming to save us. This is where we are. We have to save ourselves. Our governments face generally high debt. And politicians have different incentives. So what is the priority for every first-term politician? What is the priority of every politician in their first term?
Win another term.
It's winning a second. What's the priority for every politician in their second term? Winning a third. And what's the priority for politician in their third term? Winning a fourth term. So they have specific incentives which may not necessarily line up with the national interest. I think like politics is like anything. You can confuse the time. You can have good politics, bad politics. It's like any other aspect of life. I think that there's just really a big role for what I call civil society people like yourselves in here, different organizations. To really what I argue to try to make the economy as politician-proof as possible, because their priorities will change is to really have institutions. So when I think what would you prefer? You get a choice. A charismatic, inspirational politician or some good institution. My students invariably think that charismatic leaders different, but really want to build something because they can supply. So I would take 4 engines, be one spine, and I think civil society has to hold it together, or at least at a minimum hold the politicians accountable. I think OECS integration is what I see as pillar 1. Given the history of natural disasters and other things, that resilience is critical, building an economy that can absorb shock. I think Eastern Caribbean Central Bank has taken the lead with what we call big puts, how Dominica can fit into that. And ultimately, as economists, we believe that the wealth of nations or wealth of countries does ultimately how productive you are as people, your infrastructure. Okay, so again, OECS integration. More or less is a condition of nature, but I think fragmentation is a choice. And I think deeper and further integration with the Eastern Caribbean is Dominican strategy for really scaling up and defining its voice. The OECS stands out as quite a success story in regional integration. We are way ahead of the region. We have a single currency. That's one of the hurdles. I was living in Barbados at Cape campus when I was offered the job in Antigua. I went and renewed my St. Vincent passport. I was flying down in Antigua, show my passport, and I'm good to go. So we have that east of movement, but really Dominica, given particularly with population loss, I think Dominica should be at the forefront as a voice for even more OECS integration to really build that scale. One procurement market, buy medicines, or also get that. So one diplomatic voice, again, some sort of common foreign policy that when you're dealing with these countries that okay, you're dealing with X number of votes at one block, because the traditional rule or principle is that you're trying to divide and rule. Again, resilience. I think this is an extremely important policy agenda for Dominica in terms of building that resilience. And it's not just about stronger roofs or concrete buildings. It's really about taking advantage of modern developments to have the capacity to absorb shocks without really losing the future. And we have some interesting examples. So Dominica would have gotten $19.3 million US from the Caribbean, from CRIF, within 14 days of Hurricane Maria. That's what I mean by resilience, making these kind of. So Jamaica just got flattened by Melissa. But again, they would have gotten 70.8 million. Again, why this type of insurance is so important is, traditionally when you get hit by a storm, assessors come in, they say, this is your damage, they promise you money. And then the money takes the scenic route to get to you while you have needs. But with these types of insurance and so on, you can actually, you get the money immediately. So in case of Jamaica's bond, which is a good example, I think we all need to learn from. Once the wind speed hits a certain level, it automatically triggers that payment. So the model works. The CRIF, Jamaica's cat bond, really one of the first in the world to pioneer that, and we have a lot to learn. Now the next step is to scale that, because in a lot of ways, the money we get now is not enough to really deal with the damage. I think Dominica alone is too small to issue a bond. So the one thing that I'm campaigning for is to have an OECS bond along the scale of Jamaica. Let's say something like 500 million. So that if any one of us gets it gets triggered, and that there can be immediate relief. And we have the expertise in it to do this. We have work. And Jamaica has done it quite successfully, and I think that has the potential to be a game changer. And again, there are a lot of examples across the world where people have do this in the Pacific states and parts of Africa. So again, there is really no need to reinvent the wheel. So I think also this is where the civil society is really important in terms of resilience. When there's a disaster, I am of the view that relying on centralized national disaster response is problematic. Sometimes neighborhoods are cut off for periods of time. And building that capacity at the level of the community, I think is really an important one. So you really want to have, I mean, I'm not wedded to this, but I'm just using parish resilient plans, really building resilience at the local level so that we are not reliant on a national fund. I also think it's important to stop creating crises before the wind blows. We live in a hurricane pattern and we act like we don't. So what happens when there is a hurricane coming to any of our lives? We're all watching the thing on TV, we're seeing the cone and coming in and we're going along, and then suddenly, like midday, one day, school gets called off, everybody driving to pick up their kids to get home, we have gridlock on the roads, everybody rushing to the supermarkets, etc. Why can't we really stop creating the care? Okay, we have along with some is a care country. So suddenly at 5 island campus, one we do that for them. And we get periodically because sometimes nothing happens, but we prefer that. We're like, okay, we are shutting down 24, 36 hours before. We move all our classes online, let people work remotely, so on. And it is really an attempt to stop adding the part of chaos on top of it. Every organization have a well-structured disaster response plan that really doesn't lead to the kind of chaos. So again, that resilience, which is really grounded in three principles, brethren. Making sure you have the money to respond when there's a crisis, and there are financial market solutions there. I think our main challenge is scale. And in the ECCB, CDB, they are there, they're not just there for to get good jobs and so on. They are developmental institutions, and if they can structure this OECS-wide bond, I think that's a big game changer. Again, building resilience at the community level. And actually acting and behaving like we live in a hurricane zone. And organizations having plans so that we stop creating a crisis before the wind leaves. Also, in the sort of building that resilience, we certainly in the region have the capacity to have some more energy sovereignty. I argue that right now in the region we are paying twice. We're paying the light bill, and then we are paying the foreign exchange to import the fuel that makes. I have an example of somebody I know here. Her bill has gone up 3 times. She's using the same appliances, etc. But the sun beats down on us all the time. We have wind, we have geothermal, etc. So really, if we are serious about it, we have the capacity for it. Again, there are no financial solutions. There are no banks or credit unions offering attractive facilities that a person can get the upfront costs of a solar panel on their roof. And for me, this is not theoretical. So, Barbados, I have an electric vehicle. And this is where government comes. The government of Barbados does not charge any duty on electric. So any electric vehicles come in, that's also when I say when you're small, you can pivot. Because of that government action, for the last 4 years, at least 75% of the new cars coming into Boston are either electric or hybrid. And you know, the light bill has gone up with the war, and my light bill at home came in last month for 900. And everybody was crying, but when I said, "But this is," I said, "Well, calm down. Remember, you are charging the electric vehicles that's part of your bill." But think about it. I don't know what the cost of gas is in Dominica. I wonder what it costs you to fill an SUV for a month in Dominica. So what I have to remind everybody is like bill, one of our vehicles being run on gasoline would cost us more than. So we have capacity for energy sovereignty. If the financial institutions, the credit union, the government can come on board, that person can afford the upfront cost on their roof to read the house, the numbers work out. It's so I see that energy sovereignty as the big push is a critical part of that. Well, and the big push. The big push is from the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, where we are going, how do we double the size of the economy in it? And there are a lot of initiatives around. So right now, the Dominica's per capita income is 9,000. How can we get that up 15, 18,000 US up in the next 10 years' time? Youth unemployment, very high level. How do we get them down? And so one of my messages is Dominica, in my opinion, any OECD country should not be crafting their economic policy just on their own. They should be trying to fit in or see how they can capitalize on this big push and how we can move together as a region. What I try to argue though is that it's not growing the economy, but growing the economy. Who captures the gain? Doubling it for who? Because if we double it and 75% of the growth goes into the hands, how we rarely move. So who captures the gain? And does Dwayne get a job? We all know Dwayne has a few subjects looking for work. Does he get a job? Or does the inequality widen? And I think Dominica has a really potentially significant role to play. I think there are some clusters that Dominica can really help us to drive geothermal and renewable. I think Dominica has the capacity to really become an exporter of energy across the region. And I would like to see targets like, you have 70% of your energy by renewable by 2030. And you can't just leave it to the government. Civil society has to really move to that. Climate adaptation services. You've had all these experiences with hurricanes. You've had to adjust to them. Is there expertise that you can sell to the rest of the world? Then nature positive tourism. You don't call it the nature island. It shouldn't just be a slogan. Because even within the Caribbean, most of us, when I'm coming from Barbados, most of us, we this much open land. There is no river in Barbados. When I first moved to Barbados, there's no such thing as a river. There's not a river for Pidea. There's no salt for spring. So I think again, Dominica has a unique opportunity really in that nature positive tourism. And there's a lot of evidence. You can get sea and sand in a lot of places in the world. My friends, my PhD, I was living and working in Singapore for a year, and I understood for the first time why Columbus thought he had reached the East Indies. Because It's very, yeah, different. It's just on the eastern end. You can, you go to Bali and all of those places, you can get that. But that nature positive tourism is really a unique opportunity for the region and the world. I am also very concerned about young men in our region. We have a homicide crisis across. Peruvian people are the most loving, warm people in the world, but we murder each other. They will murder as drop of a hat. How many murders in Bogota per year? How many murders per year in this Bogota? Anybody? Any guess?
Last year, we had 22.
In Dominica?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Now, for such a small place, that's a huge number. So in terms of the big push, I think there's some areas that we are missing. So I'm using an example of somebody I'm going to call Kelvin, he's 19. And he can bench press 120 kilograms. He can run the 400 meters in 40 seconds. He's never had a formal job. But Calvin has been offered cash by somebody to run something for them twice a month. And if you walk through any area of Dominica, you find these young men working with precision, dedication. More Airbnb, import more cars, do more of that buying and selling. I think that breeds dependence, the same dependence on external factors. And I think very importantly, it doesn't spread the wealth. It leaves a significant chunk of the economy outside of that. And these are not obvious to you until you are around it. So, 2008, close friend of mine, who was my neighbor, David Thompson became, he was my neighbor. And some gentlemen came to him for the horse racing, I don't like horse racing. Very cruel to the animals, seems like a very strange sport. And the guys came and said they wanted to do some night racing. I went with them, I was really quite shocked at the significant number of young men who were really employed around that whole thing. The horses have to be trained, they have to be groomed, etc. And that's a creative economy. You know, I did my PhD in England. You think of the theater scene in London, you know, you look at the displays, but what people don't see is the industry behind it, the people building those costumes, building those stages. You know, we watched the movies, you know, it was very interesting. And when I was chairman of the NIS, we went to meet a client, who took us to Hollywood studios in LA. And, you know, we sort of forget that this is acting. So there's actually a lot of work building those stages. It's quite an eye opener. So, you know, you're watching a movie, Martin, and you see somebody go upstairs. There's actually no upstairs. You know, they go up some steps. Some people change the decor down and they come back down. And the little boys like to watch Dukes of Hazzard, those car races. And you see where those races, just a little piece of road. So there's a whole industry behind that. And Dominica has some interesting. I thought I was up with things until I was in Antigua and I never heard of Puyo. I always thought of Dominica as a nice Christian Catholic place. But again, the whole creative economy, these are things we've taken for granted. But I think if we don't build out things like sport, the creative economy, we can have growth. And the story we hear throughout the region, that the bank governor, finance minister does the report, the economy grew. And what does everybody say? You're not feeling this one. But why aren't you feeling the growth? Because the growth is in the same sectors, it's the money circulating. So I think the creative economy driving that. And then productivity. You know, productivity is really what drives economic. You have to invest in your people. So education and not just certification for skills. So why did we open the UWI Violence Camp? One of our main motivations is that in the Americas, if you take from the most northern part of the Americas, southern part, the Caribbean has the lowest rate of enrollment in education. And that always surprises a lot of people, including myself, because you know, you live in your little bubble, and everybody you know looking to go to college or university, but there's a whole chunk of people who are not making that. To get into any tertiary education, people want math and English. What percentage of persons who took PXC FIC last year have passed in grade in English? But what's the pass rate? You know, less than 30%. So that means that 70% of these kids can't really progress to anything else. But I think we really need to make that massive investment in human capital that our population can really function in a modern digital economy. The physical infrastructure, the roads, the port, the airport, and so on. So again, you know, getting labor productivity. And it's not just about, so education reform is important. I think we continue to perpetuate a colonial education system, which was really designed to train an elite to go into the public service, to like part of the private sector. And it's a lot about certification, it's catering to the private student. We can all raise our hands and think to be a secondary school teacher, you love your bright students, you know. But again, trying to get everybody up to a certain level of competence is really not the mindset. In fact, one of the biggest challenges in Antigua with this project of violence is elitism. And for the public to get accustomed to the fact that a degree is not just for a set of bright people or who could have had the money to go abroad. You know, it's for everybody to get up to that. And again, these degrees, if you have to work the paper, people have to be productive. So again, that productivity drive, I think, is critical. A lot of small countries have done this before, so I'm really optimistic about it if we can get our minds around it. Mauritius is an example. But I mean, when we used to talk a lot in Singapore, and I don't really reference Singapore too much. I think they've gone and left us. They're no longer good. But like Mauritius, Mauritius is identical to the Caribbean, except it's a different part of it. I mean, the history, the geography, everything is identical. Sugar, same history, a lot of Indians, others, and so on. And they've really been able, with investments in education, their infrastructure, to make a massive pivot. I put Iceland in there because of what geothermal and hydro has done for their economy. Really made them, I mean, these are countries that are around 99% energy, and I think Dominica has some capacity there. Now, a lot of this is gonna need money as we make the investments. And I think Dominica, because of migration, really has a significant diaspora. And we treat them as remittances. Maybe some people coming to vote, that happens in some elections and so on. But I really see them as almost another island, another source of money. And instead of doing remittances, what if we can post diaspora bond? You create an instrument, but the government doesn't have to borrow this. Think about most of our developmental history, really focused on government. I think that's not forward tourism, the amount of debt. Again, it's not like politics, but they have their own incentive. Difficult for them. That's not, don't think that hard to think beyond political cycle. And if we're going to succeed in being sustainable, then I think civil society really has to step up, even just to hold the government accountable. You know, the government said you were gonna do these 10 projects. How many of them have been done? You know, we have a crime crisis, 22 murders. How many of them have been solved? And I mean, professionally, I'm what you call a behavioral economist, and we study a lot of psychology. And these things work, you know. We've seen things like countries where, in a prominent place in the downtown, you know, a business has invested in a billboard, an electronic billboard, just flashing in front of people the amount of homicides for the year and how much have been solved. That these things influence people to hold their politicians accountable. So the churches, credit unions, youth groups, women's organizations, I think they have a critical role in shaping the agenda as well as holding the government accountable.
I believe because the largest barrier I am implementation on that you get many wonderful plan, but you typically cannot implement that implementation that was because the a lot of when a big it's a big it's a whole thing of practice about about comfort because they computer science that are supposed to sort of build on that or something on social media. The percentage of Dominica comes from in Europe, 25%. So in fact, here what is the status of the budget in the implementation? Simple dashboard. So I mean, we science and really cure this implementation deficit. So, first time, it can really kind of slow down again. And I'm always very keen to work with different civil society. In your own country, how can we contribute to a more resilient stuff? How do we contribute? Well, I don't think my is something for fun. What can you do in your household to move it with but maybe other? How am I going to protect my household from what people want? I think it's sort of one of the again, one of my critical people. I love this song of book. The rhythms of Dominica, Carnival, Sunset. But you also know that things are more with minimum wage, 1 million, for training. Cousin to run the work as a production assistant for me. Spend so money because of stuff. I don't want to leave, but she's not me now for to say that really a specific country. That's one reason. Will answer that question within you in the next 12 months to really make the idea. Now, no money coming. I didn't do it. Hopefully, we can use this moment to really build something.
Right. We're gonna open the floor for just a short Q&A. So I see right off the bat. Go ahead, Claire.
Um, UWI pagkatapos nito when kung bakit nag-video follow you don't have to take it. You got to every 26% of in October, I was involved, but I don't make it. So we can go. And that's what we have. Not being for no worries. Why do you think that you want for it? Some element of the point to level. You might be everyone the company has 150 then answer the I don't know if it is when the company has every these are the mistakes. Then that and they have no behind them. No, uh, there's one is there. That even so and even even comment early design. It is the oil people but you can be there in the level of power there. So therefore, the banks which work completely involved that like another bit, yeah, that's the dealing into one of that. At some time, someone friend so and other DIY, but time the more of the level of business of March. You need to like all that, you need all the as a given capital, different people that is and you want to be in control for the So I'm yeah, I mean, it's less on that. I'm like, it's fun. You know, for the next, then, also one of here to the Dominica. And I like one of the we just like made not but we traffic. But if that really on tourism, yeah, then it's obviously it's so one time the last 20 years another one is who there is no thought. Some other things, yeah, yeah, the people that which we say and not there. Instead of political they are free one in the but people even from the one they got being studied. Fortunate lot of people there is you have enough university or good only the same Dominica is already but then not really get very very close to people uh, so and when work with providing more um it we are making it to boost up tourism and operating benefits we expect. How long from the side? What are you say? Because that is from an idea, for example, electoral reform. But electoral reform is factor in okay, yeah, so today, like, oh, data, and then the from the society, on now, link, and they want to love, want, want, uh, although it can be more on the energy Yeah. We have been fucking never want to talk so. We don't feel impacted by the right movement and the right to get in. That the market compared to but for that, the one in the forward that they were moving on and it's doctor and then one so that is a year of that he so you can't fall yeah. Secondly, it is yeah. And you can conclude the hand and more than the use of the real what we found family that is one thing. So yeah, the time is but not the no popularity of one. That's not the explore. That's a thing of because the time is actually every time. Attention, time hydrogen and oxygen. The other thing you are in oxygen. Hospital, oxygen. Because oxygen, all of it being oxygen. Some of it, technology of technology, yeah. Then you have to be find elements that is a fit to the user of movement. Something called language science is a element of the one and that is important for figuring out blood pressure. So if you're less time, maybe that's that is get okay. Scientific time, so like during the pandemic, in incubator or during or like that. So just have it more use so much more. If a lot more no and then what in document. But probably great. It's really, really in terms of uh, involved system in the right money. Right? When the positive one the positive, but you need to study what the copyright is you got to be out. You know how to do it. This is um, I'll drive all the copyright, without copyright, what for only thing. Yes, you just to run the exam. Oh, some cricket. They got 20. You have just all the games in the country. You raise for stuff. That's what the recording of fire. And you know, whenever it's of paper on fire. Yeah, all one of our biggest problems when you live back then, that is appear. Yeah, but in point of bit more people than we don't be involved. And the result before is that the EPM because we did over from the case we are and it's not one corporate environment for not the problem is that so because they want to they will take that account. One is the people installed in the Nicaragua, but of course, the community community, but we need to address all these problems. You know, move forward. Um, the two is from 2023 reported about 6.3 million US dollars into power to 161% to point to their building. But the big is a combustion engine in the it will pay up for the appearances of either one. So that is design from run that was then about um um Finally, one, so, or because it ended up fun itself. Good. Now, I don't want to do what he so in that current moment that we did the playing about in this project, it makes sense that we don't have any a movement um I'm fine. You know, try to make like someone be up in front of but you would um, you have to find that not only but all the without anyone like I'm giving God is bigger than anything but because the movement for us to be just love um, I mean, very good for and about and Numerical, but hopefully, what? Really, pandemic. Yeah, but question. I think we're trying to move. I just want to make one comment in relation to something that I have observed in personal experience is that we live within our current media properly. Um, between the weekends, I even I know we can't fulfill 100% of everything, but that collaboration is something, and I got very clear when Dominica was exporting was one of the people didn't realize, and I said to somebody, look at this, we buy bottled water from overseas, which is foreign exchange. But imagine you buying your bottled water in the same currency that you use, same currency you use, and helping to prop up the economy because it was working. And when Hurricane Maria hit, for example, there was a shortage of plantain over Dominica. And I remember a friend of mine calling me because I'm from Finland, Sorika. She said, is there a way that you can put us in touch with people who will plant because we need stuff urgently? And so, I mean, if we as um, region and to provide, we can't go by ourselves. I mean, as much as we are like very different from we did it's very similar. But look, we're different. So in a family, even each sibling has their own space. You still have to together when that person down the road. Because you have the full family going down the road. Further. And I think that this this topic reinforces that, but it also reinforces that fortune, and it's gonna have to be people like us. It's gonna have to be the civil society, the educators, the people who want and impact the next generation, especially because guess what? If it's not right up with us, but it's gonna be we don't even have. But if we can change the people who are coming, the persons who are stepping into the role, then we can see that change happen. And I think that is where we often pass that knowledge on that advocacy on that fire and activism which I'm seeing in this room have to be nurtured in that generation, that because otherwise we're just gonna sit down and have this. Boy, and when you walk in, like by the interact. We have um,
It's not like we take off the right of work. We turn it off. Call it. Thing. And you talk to Eugene from
Oh, and you mentioned
getting rid of the I believe that the building is really are creating a fund. But we still have no problem. Really no hope to coming back to the top. Sure. Middle of the top. And he was on this song, when we of the so, gentlemen, very much for being with us. And for the evening. Yeah, I want to look back, right? You know, All right, thank you.